Hello, gaming. Welcome to Dimensional Analysis, the pointless series where we discuss connections between seemingly unrelated topics, characters, and stories. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go mow Freeman's lawn.
Next pairing we have is Whoville from Dr. Seuss's The Grinch and Fahrenheit 451. So right off the bat, what are some observations you can make about these two works?
Well, I'm noticing a distinct totalitarian dictatorship present in both societies. Now, it's a little bit more obvious in Whoville. They've got this, like, they're basically like a hive mind, right? Like, they sing in perfect harmony. Like, it's basically one voice, but just echoed. Like, how do they do that shit?
Tell me, when do you hear a Who talk? One time. And it's the little girl, almost an infant.
It's representative of innocence, It's like the idea Blake, his tiger burning bright versus like the sheep, like the innocent versus experienced thing. Right. It's the idea that like a person is distinct from society when they're a child, and then as they develop, they sort of become ingrained and they become a non-person. Their individuality is destroyed, and that idea is basically the entire story of Fahrenheit 51. I mean, it's the breakdown of uniqueness, of caring pretenses. Like this, in a world dominated by screens, how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we make something of ourselves? Like the family is now not even related to us. It's universal. The family, the weird ass people on the TV that Montag's wife watches. This is reality for every human being. How do we get out of that? And why do the Who's exemplify this?
Well, I think the important point to make here is that while the Who's down in Whoville, the tall and the small, exemplify this point so much more than the citizens in Fahrenheit 451. Like there's some connection here, but let's be honest, it's the Who's. That uniqueness that is spurned by innocence. I think that's really, really exemplified in the fact that Cindy Lou Who is the only Who that actually has any speaking lines outside of the general chorus, because for a brief moment you can see the intrinsic nature of humanity, which is to be individual. It's to be unique. Like, we have reached a level of consciousness, a level of thought processes and decision making that makes each of us different. And when she sees that giant green Santa Claus come down, is stealing all her shit, she has thoughts about it.
It's sort of like a wake-up call.
It really is. And come next morning, she's just part of the whole again. Mm-hmm. Part of this whole giant machine.
It's the cycle, Every year we're trained, we're indoctrinated in this Christmas society.
We really are. It reminds me, another point to make with this is that we are equating this innocence, this youth, with being the good, the natural. That reminds me of a Taoist teaching, actually, in the unsculpted block of wood, that Lao Tzu basically said that each person is good, is blank, intrinsically pure. It's good. That's kind of a combination of Mencius Confucianism as well. But you also have this. Each person is this block of wood. It's meant to be wood. It's born as wood. It's supposed to function as wood. It's part of a tree. But then things, groups, other people that have ill will sculpt that wood into something, a bowl, a cup, a piece of jewelry, something. And they will make it something that the wood was not meant to be. So that's kind of a similar thing you see here in both Fahrenheit 451 and with the Who's, where they're just every year, every time there's a new member, they're just sculpted into this giant machine of I don't want to say unity, because unity gives it a positive connotation, but it's more of a
disunity. It's a dystopia.
Yeah, it's like this hive mind, like
Bees?
you said. I like that. I like what you said earlier, because there's no decision making, no fighting back against it. It just is. I think that's really interesting.
Remember, kids, don't let the Calvinist televangelist tell you that you're going to hell just because you were born with a predisposition to enjoy crossing the streams.
Always remember.
Yeah. In a way, moving on, Montauk is sort of like Cindy Lou Who, and the Grinch is like the monks that he meets outside of the civilization who memorize the books that they study. They're completely isolated from the world, but they live in relative peace. But when the Grinch sees this, year-long, repetitive, meaningless process just broadcasted for all the world to suffer through, he at some point he realizes that enough is enough, and in a way, Fahrenheit 451 is much more hopeful than the Who, because because in the end, Montag, he sees the light. He realizes that his society is broken, but he doesn't fall back into the old way of life. He gets up and leaves. He joins the Grinch. He puts on the antlers. He gets out. Cindy Lou Who, she doesn't have that privilege. She doesn't have freedom. In fact, it's the Grinch that turns. The Grinch falls. He can no longer resist the onslaught of unprogress. There's no hope for the Grinch or any of the poor Who's down in Whoville.
No hope at all. And as we get to that time of year again, I want to remind everyone that there's always going to be that kind of situation. There's always going to be those Who's in your life. So if you have someone that's just a Who down in Whoville, whether they be the tall or the small, and you hear them singing, that low sound, started low, but starts to grow.
The dogma.
If you hear that, make sure that you read a book.
Yes, yeah.
Don't stop.
2 tickets for a book, please.
2 tickets for a book.
Yeah. And if you celebrate Christmas this year, then you're a conservative fuckwad and I hate you. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah.